Hi guys, today I'm going to be doing a lens review of the brand new Canon RF 50mm f1.8. And I'm going to start right now. Hi guys, and welcome back to the channel. So in this lens review, I'm going to have a closer look at the Canon RF 50mm f1.8, a brand new RF lens for the Canon mirrorless system. So the Canon R, the RP, or the brand new R5 or R6. And how does this lens compare versus its older EF 50mm f1.8 STM lens, which was very, very popular because of its incredibly cheap price. So, with that out of the way, let's get started. So the first thing I want to talk about is the overall build quality and the design of this lens. I must say the actual design of it is a big upgrade over the older EF 50mm f1.8. So the actual design of this lens is really nice. So it's got this really nice premium plastic construction, but it has got a decent metal mount. But due to the size of it, it makes it feel quite sturdy to the feel. It's also got this really nice kind of padded focus ring that you can find on the front. It's really kind of good to move, but again it is just fly-by-wire, so there is no full-time manual focus mode. But what's nice about this lens is the actual button allows you to change either from automatic to manual focus, but it also obviously has a control ring, which is brand new to all RF lenses. So it allows you to change, basically it's a multi-function ring, which allows you to change a bunch of settings from aperture, ISO, or even shutter speed. So all you need to do is half press the actual focus button on the camera, and what it does is you can actually change pretty much all settings. Again, this does match up to a lot of the newer RF lenses that have this. So it isn't tickable, so it doesn't have this kind of tick feature, so it's very, very smooth. So if you've ever had any L glass, a lot of them do tick, but this one doesn't do that. So it's a lot smoother, especially if you're doing any focus pulls with the STM motor. So overall, I thought the build quality and the design of this lens is a big upgrade over the older EF 50mm f1.8. So the next thing I want to talk about is the overall image quality of this lens, and is it worth an upgrade over the older EF 50mm f1.8? Well, to be honest, I didn't notice much of a difference, especially if you had a look at the colours or even the resolution. Both of these lenses are quite sharp. I must say it's maybe 5 to 10% sharper, but to be honest, unless you're looking comparison, so you're looking at the same photo just shot on two different lenses, you're not going to notice much of a difference. The only difference I really noticed was the chromatic aberration. So if you have a look at the Canon EF 50mm f1.8, the chromatic aberration is quite severe, especially at f1.8 on high contrast edges. But what I thought was really good with this particular 50mm f1.8 is there is a slight reduction in the amount of chromatic aberration. But to be honest, that is realistically the only difference I noticed. Vignetting, distortion, resolution and colour are all very similar. So if you already own the EF 50mm f1.8, it isn't necessarily a massive upgrade within the image quality side of things, apart from the decent amount of chromatic aberration reduction that I did notice on high contrast edges. So the next thing I want to compare is the size and weight of these lenses, and how do they compare, especially if you go ahead and place it on a new RF mounted mirrorless camera. Well, to be honest, off camera, both of these lenses are very similar in size and weight. If we go ahead and compare the size, you can see these lenses are pretty much identical. And if we go ahead and place it with the weight, you can see that these lenses are also very similar. The EF 50mm f1.8 comes in at 159 grams, and the RF 50mm f1.8 comes in at 160 grams. So you can see these lenses are pretty much identical. But if we go ahead and place it on a mirrorless camera, this is where the size and weight starts to be making more of a difference. So obviously the RF lens fits natively onto a mirrorless camera, so the size and weight doesn't change. But the EF lens, because we've got to adapt it, means it makes it slightly larger because we've got to place a RF to EF adapter on it. So if we go ahead and place the EF to RF adapter on the 50mm f1.8, you can see that it increases it to around 300 grams because the EF to RF adapter weighs around about 140. And it also increases its size to pretty much 2/3 of its original size. So if you are after a lighter weight, smaller lens for your new mirrorless camera, then I would highly recommend purchasing the RF lens. But if you already own the EF lens and you're just simply buying an adapter, to be honest, you aren't going to have a massive lens on. You're just going to notice a slight increase in size, especially if you already haven't used the RF 50mm. Now there is again a slight difference in the actual girth of the lenses as well. So if you look nose down, you can see that the filter thread sizes are slightly different. So if we go and have a look at the EF 50mm filter thread, you can see that it comes in at 49mm, which to be honest isn't a very large lens. It is one of the smaller ones, but it is nowhere near as small as the RF lens, coming in at just 43mm. Now, it is easier to find a 49mm filter thread over a 43mm filter thread, which basically means filters such as UVs are going to be more difficult to find for the RF mount. But to be honest, a little bit of Googling will probably find you one fairly easily. So the next thing I want to talk about is the focus motor and image stabilization. Now, because of a lot of the new mirrorless cameras have image stabilization built in, including the R5 and R6, a lot of the new RF lenses don't necessarily need to rely on image stabilization. And because of that, this particular 50mm f1.8 does not have image stabilization. But it obviously does have an autofocus mode. And what it does is it actually uses an STM motor. Now, an STM motor is a fairly old technology done by Canon, but they have slightly upgraded the actual optics of this lens, so it is a little bit smoother and a little bit quieter, especially in low light capabilities. So if we go have a look at the actual STM or stepping motor, you can see that it is quite quick. You can see that it's focusing from the foreground to the background fairly quickly. But you might think the optics for this isn't going to be great for video. But what Canon have done, which I think is really smart, is they've actually slowed this lens down when you are in video mode. And because they've slowed it down, it pretty makes this lens almost silent. But if you go ahead and turn it back into photography mode, there is a little bit of a noise issue. But again, if you're just using it for photos, noise isn't necessarily going to be an issue because you're not recording audio. So if you are going to be using the internal microphone of a camera, and if you go ahead and turn it to video mode, this particular lens is pretty much going to be silent, which is a big upgrade over the older EF lens, which didn't have this video mode built in. So it was always quite quick, and I must say it was quite loud. So if you are going to be using this lens for video, it's going to be a big upgrade over the older EF lens, unless you're using an external microphone, such as a shotgun microphone or even a lapel microphone. So if you are planning on using the internal microphone of your camera and you're wanting to use a lens, this lens is going to be perfect for you. So the last thing and the most important thing is going to be price. How does this lens compare to other price point lenses, especially within the new RF system? Well, to be honest, this is by far the cheapest RF lens to date, only coming in at just £219. But that is a little bit more expensive, especially if you compare it to the EF 50mm f1.8, only coming in at £99. So this lens is a little bit more expensive, especially if you're buying it for the mirrorless system. But obviously, if you do own a mirrorless camera and you want to buy the older EF lens, unless you own that EF to RF adapter, you're going to have to buy that as well. So that'll increase that again by £99, bringing the whole value of that particular lens kit to around £200. So to be honest, they are very similar price points if you haven't necessarily got an adapter already. So if you are looking at a very cheap 50mm f1.8, to be honest, these two are fairly comparable, especially for the new mirrorless system. But if we go and have a look at a lot of the new mirrorless lenses, these lenses are incredibly expensive. The closest lens you can realistically find is the 35mm f1.8, which is a fairly reasonable price of just over £500. But apart from that, all the other pretty much L-glass lenses are really expensive, and most of them are even over £2,000 to even £3,000. So if you are after an incredibly cheap 50mm prime lens for the RF mount, this lens is pretty much going to be the only lens, but also one of the cheapest lenses you can purchase. So what are my final thoughts, and what lens would I recommend for your new mirrorless camera? Well, to be honest, there is no shadow of a doubt the one that I would recommend. I would highly recommend purchasing the new RF 50mm f1.8, especially if you haven't already purchased the EF 50mm f1.8. There isn't a large difference in optical performance apart from the chromatic aberration I've already mentioned, and to be honest, the sound of the stepping motor and the actual motor itself is a little bit quieter. But apart from that, these lenses are pretty much identical. The only difference is obviously price. Because of the new RF lens is a lot newer, you're going to be paying more of a premium for that lens over the older EF lens. But again, if you haven't owned an EF to RF adapter already, or you're going to have to buy one, you're noticeably going to have to purchase obviously that as well, which means that the prices are pretty much going to be the same. So without a shadow of a doubt, I would highly recommend purchasing the new RF mount, especially if you own an RP, an R, or an R5 or R6. It pretty much is no competition in this regard. Brilliant, and there we go guys. So there is my lens review of the 50mm f1.8 for the new mirrorless system. And I say it is a really decent lens, and it's finally nice to actually own a 50mm f1.8 that isn't that expensive and that I can finally place a native lens onto my new mirrorless camera. Again guys, if you want to like, comment and subscribe to my channel, it really does help my channel grow. Also, if you want to hit the bell notification, so you don't miss any of my latest content. But until next time guys, keep creating.